Going live. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. How we doing, everybody?
Good.
Excellent. All right, so what I want to do is I want to start the class off by asking for any feedback on the exam. Um, I know there's only 3 people here, but what did you guys think of the exam? Did you think fair, too hard, too easy,
Thought it was fair.
fine?
Yeah.
Everybody's thought it was okay?
Yeah, I thought you gave us a lot of time to do the questions. It didn't crash or anything, so.
Right. Yeah. So no problems? Excellent. All right, so that's the way the exams are going to be for the rest of the semester, right? It's very similar type of questions. Like, yes, there will be questions on from the notes and from PowerPoints and the lecture. Make sure you're still reading the textbook. Don't neglect to read the textbook, but use my notes as a study guide on where to study. So don't just say, I don't need to read the textbook anymore. Make sure you're still reading the chapters and everything, but you can use my notes as a study guide on where to go through. There will be more questions on some of the stuff that we watch. So make sure you're watching the videos as well, whether here or online. But other than that, the exam should be the same. All right, so if there's no other questions, I guess we'll go ahead and start off with our warm-up question for today. Name your worst pet peeve. What is your worst pet peeve? I think for me, my worst pet peeve, a lot of people bring up the thing that annoys them is when they're driving in the fast lane and someone's driving slow in the fast lane, right? That bothers me a little bit, but I don't mind if you drive slow in the fast lane, I can get around you, but what drives me crazy is when someone drives slow and then you pass them and then they decide to go fast again and they're on your tail. That is the most annoying thing to me. It's like, choose your speed. You want to go slow or fast? Don't play games with me is what I say to them. My road rage, I scream out my windows. But yeah, what's one of your pet peeves? We'll start with Eddie.
When I'm like walking on the sidewalk or just walking behind somebody and they walk so slow. Like it'll be like in a public area that's known to be like a busy area where people need to move and get to places and they'll just walk so slow.
Yeah, people are moving, they got places to be, someone's walking too slow, or they'll walk slow and then they'll just stop randomly.
Yeah.
That's always annoying as well, right? Good one. Sawyer?
My biggest pet peeve is probably people not sticking to their word. Like
Okay.
they'll say they'll do something. Like you hear a lot of people will talk all the time about doing something, but then they won't do it.
Okay, right.
Or like they make a plan and then bail out like the last minute. That's probably my biggest pet peeve.
I could definitely see how that'd be frustrating. And it's Sasha?
Yeah.
Sasha, what's your biggest pet peeve?
I don't like when people like snap or make like little like sounds.
All the mouth sounds, you're not a fan of it when you're chewing. Do you watch ASMR? Are you big in ASMR?
Actually, I like mukbang videos.
Okay.
I do, yeah, I like it.
All right, excellent.
But only in that.
But only in that situation.
Only
If
in
it's
that
real, if
situation.
it's in real life, you're not a fan of the mouth sounds. All right. All right, awesome. Let's see if we can have a discussion with some of these discussion questions here. So the next question is, all right. So last time we talked about the introduction of sound. We're mostly in the 1920s, right? We get into the 1930s a little bit, but now we're in the 1930s. Today's chapter is the Hollywood studio system. We're going to start it today, and then we're going to finish up on Tuesday. So it's like a 2-lecture focus on one chapter here. But what is happening during this time period, this historical moment? We're talking about the 1930s primarily, 1930s, 1940 to 45. What is happening during this time period?
World War II.
World War II is definitely happening. So the United States enters the World War II in 1941, right? What else is happening?
Great Depression.
The Great Depression before that, right? So the 1930s, we have the Great Depression, has a huge impact on the film industry, in the theater industry as well. So let's talk about that. What is the Great Depression? How does it impact the film industry in general?
Well, things were a lot cheaper.
Okay, right. So the price of going to the movie theaters dropped down to a dime in some places, right? What else?
Attendance actually increased like later on, and then a lot of like innovative like things started happening throughout it too.
Right. it's kind of a trend where you see where you're having, when countries are going through this economic downturn, for whatever reason, I mean, we can talk about the reasons, but for reasons, people are going to see more movies, right? And there's a little bit of escapism as well, trying to escape the reality of real world by going to see movies, certainly. How else is the Depression influencing the industry?
What people see in movies now.
Say it a little louder.
Sorry, what people see in movies now.
What do you mean by that?
Like, some want to visually show what's going on, like what's happening in civil wars, or like, just the tone of the film can be a bit depressing as well, like, just based off the time period.
Okay, yeah, certainly, and definitely, we're getting depressing when we're talking about film noir, and we'll talk about that next class, but certainly. Yes,
Candy and popcorn.
yeah, so this is this is where, candy and popcorn became popular, the selling of candy and popcorn. It was used primarily to generate more income. Trying to get the most money out of consumers as possible, so this is where the trend of, selling popcorn and candy during intermission, right? Also, you're seeing the use of a double feature, so 2 movies for the price of 1, right? Trying to entice people to come to the movie theaters, to come to the movies. Certainly, yes.
It's kind of like now, like Regal and all that. They're doing like the movie classics where you can see a movie for $5.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because right now the film industry, especially the theater chains, are really struggling right now. All right, what else? Describe the makeup of the film industry during this time period. How would you describe the film industry?
The big five, little three.
Yeah, we got the majors, we got the big 5 and the little 3. We got the majors and the minors. So it might be beneficial to think of this time period as having, you have the 5 majors. Off the top of your head, can you name them?
Warner Brothers is one.
Warner Brothers is one of them.
Paramount, RKO.
Paramount, RKO,
MGM.
MGM. I'll give you a hint. Recently not around anymore.
Fox.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fox is and then what were the little 3?
Columbia.
Columbia. Universal.
United Artists.
United Artists, that is correct, right? So think of it, the film industry in general as having these majors and these minors, and they're pretty much dominating. There were some independent film studios, but they're pretty much dominating the film industry during this time period. The main characteristic of being a major is what? What defines a major?
Vertically integrated.
You're vertically integrated, right? So these majors, whether it's Warner Brothers or Fox, they also owned theater chains, and they also had international distribution, right? So they had sort of a monopoly in a sense, right? So in order for you to be a major, you need to be vertically integrated, right? All right, excellent. What were the innovations in filmmaking during this time period? I think there's one obvious one.
The big dolly thing.
Yeah, so you're seeing was it the Bell and Howell Rotinator or something like that? We'll talk about showing it in a second. But yeah, basically the dolly crane, right? Certainly. What else? The addition of color, right? During this time period, is sort of Technicolor. Any other innovations during this time period? We're seeing some innovations in special effects. Do you know what some of these terms are? Of course, we'll talk about them, but like rear projection, optical printing, that sort of thing, and we'll talk about that in more detail here in a second. Raise your hand if you know what if you've heard of Citizen. Have you heard of Citizen? Okay. So I'm assuming you guys have not seen Citizen Kane, right? But it's often considered to be a masterpiece in filmmaking, and we'll talk about that once we get to it. But yeah, all right. So let's go ahead and get started. Reading off my notes. Here we go. All right, so, oh yeah, I want to do this first. So what I want to do is I want to show a clip from Gone with the Wind. We could put our film analysis caps on and have a discussion about this scene. But, watch this scene. Let me ask you this. Has anyone seen Gone with the Wind? Interested. Okay, usually more people have seen Gone with the Wind. Just to give you a little, have you heard of Gone with the Wind?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so, just give you a little background on what the story is. So obviously this came out in 1939, right, but it's, you know, it depicts, a time period before the Civil War and during the Civil War. It's mostly shown through the perspective of Scarlett here, who, so it's usually, it's shown through the eyes of a the Confederacy, right? And, what we're gonna do is we're gonna watch this clip and then we'll discuss what you think about it. Oh, why is it so low?
Woo! Just hold on and suck in.
Mommy, here's the scarlet pickle. And take it all back to the kitchen. I won't need to buy it.
Oh, yes, and you is. You's going to eat every mouthful of this.
I'm not. You put on the dress, because we're late already.
What the lamb going away?
That.
No, you ain't. You can't show your bosom for 3 o'clock. I'm going to speak to your mom about you.
If you say one word, Mother, I won't need a buy.
Well. Keep your shorts on your shoulder. I mean, for you to get off quicker and the button-up on and put on your best one. These them circles. Oh, now, Miss Scarlett, you come on and be good and eat just a little.
No. I'm going to have a good time today. And do my eating at the barbecue.
If you don't care what folks says about this family, I does. I has told you and told you that you can always tell a lady by the way that she eat in front of folks like a bird. And I ain't aiming for you to go to Mr. John Wilkins's and eat like a field hand and gobble like a hog.
Fiddle-dee-dee. Ashley Wilkes told me he likes to see a girl with a healthy appetite.
What gentleman says and what they thinks is 2 different things. And I ain't noticed Mr. Ashley asking for to marry you. Now don't eat too fast. Ain't no need to having it come right back up again.
Why is the guard to be so silly, Captain Husband? I'm coming, Paul! Oh, dear. My skin is so tight. I know I'd never get through there without belching.
All right. So let's talk about this scene for a second. What are some things that you notice with the scene?
It's color.
So it's in color, certainly.
Yeah, they use Technicolor, right?
Yes, right. And, yeah, what else?
The Manny.
Right, the Mammy character, right? So the sort of, I guess you could say, negative portrayal, the stereotypical portrayal of African Americans, right? So I think that's probably the obvious thing there. It's important to state that this actress who played the Mammy character was criticized in the black community, right? She was given a hard time for this sort of, for perpetuating these negative stereotypes, right? Obviously, her defense of it was, she said, if you don't want me to play these parts, then what parts am I going to play, right? It's important to know that there weren't a lot of roles for black actresses during this time period, right? And yes, it sort of perpetuates these negative stereotypes, but once again, it's sort of like, what was this actress supposed to do during this time period? She does get a little bit of like agency by becoming, she became very popular, right? She got a lot of, both, what was that?
Didn't she win the Oscar?
Either she won it or she was nominated. I can't remember which one, but I think that was definitely the case, right? Where you can see where you might interpret this as sort of empowering in a way, in terms of how she talks back to Scarlett and how she sort of has this. She's not passive in any way, although there are some, obviously, there's dynamics there, right? But it kind of shows. You know, we showed Birth of a Nation a couple classes before this, and you can see the lineage of a film like Birth of a Nation and Gone with the Wind. And I think the obvious here, the obvious connection is the glorification of the Confederacy, like this romanticization of the South, right? Sort of perpetuates the lost cause myth. Has anyone heard the lost cause myth? You heard that? So the lost cause myth is this rhetoric that states that, come on in, Kinsey, good to have you. Does that scare you?
Huh?
Does that scare you?
Uh-uh.
Okay, what do you have there? What are you drinking?
Got a pineapple?
You have a pineapple beverage.
Yeah. It's actually pretty good. It kind of gives me like tropical vibes.
Well, it sounds like tropical vibes. I like it. Excellent. Well, you don't have your vanilla shake, but no, your
Pumpkin spice latte.
Pumpkin spice.
Dunkin' Donuts.
yeah, you don't have that one anymore, but that's okay.
Not yet.
All right, excellent. We're talking about Gone with the Wind, and so the lost cause myth is this belief that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, right? Or at least it was, but it wasn't the main cause. It was for state rights, and it often, you see it a lot in, Birth of a Nation, and even in Gone with the Wind, this idea that the South they were these noble people who were simply fighting for their families and fighting for state rights. It's a way of sort of deflecting the blame and sort of, and not making it about slavery, which the Civil War was primarily about slavery, right? And you're seeing these myths perpetuated in both Birth of a Nation. You can see that lineage, that connection between Birth of a Nation and Gone with the Wind. It's still around several years after Birth of a Nation came out. Excellent. Let's move on. All right, so like we said before, a little discussion. The Great Depression from 1930 to the beginning of the World War II. The U.S. economy nearly collapsed during the Great Depression, as many of you, I'm sure, know about this. The U.S. entered the war in 1941. The war actually expanded the economy. There was a big war economy boost once the United States entered World War II. It might be beneficial to think of the film industry as 8 large companies that sort of dominated the film industry. Of course, we have the Big Five and the Little Three, which we listed out, but I'll go ahead and list them again. It's Paramount, MGM, Fox, Warner Brothers, RKO, the Little Three, Universal, Columbia, and United Artists. In order to be a major, you need to be vertically integrated, which means you either owned or you probably did own a theater branch, right? And there was international distribution as well. The impact the Depression had on the film industry, so it cut short the age of the movie palace. So before this, you saw a lot of movie palaces where you have these extravagant, often like elaborate movie palaces that looked like sort of like churches, cathedrals that you would play movies in. No longer would you have this. They used to have it to where, like, an usher would take you to your seat. They got rid of that. This is where popcorn and candy started getting sold during intermission. This is also where the double feature started to come into play, where you get 2 movies for the price of 1. So let's move into these individual studios. Starting off with Warner Brothers. I'm sure we're all familiar with Warner Brothers today, one of the biggest film studios today. Warner Brothers grew into one of the largest studios in the 1930s. They overcame their debts during the Depression. They often had low-budget projects, but were very successful. A lot of their plots in their movies were recycled, so a lot of like gangster films were shown by Warner Brothers, and they sort of just recycle the plots over and over again. One of their more, I guess you could say, successful genres was the Busby Berkeley musical. So Busby Berkeley was a famous director who directed a lot of musicals, but his musicals were more like they had a lot of ladies. And they had like, here, I'll show you. This is a Busby Berkeley musical number here. So you can see here it's like highly choreographed, like dance numbers and musicals. Did you enjoy it? You like it?
Yeah, I thought it looked nice.
You enjoyed it? I feel like if anyone wanted to torture me, they would just make me watch this over and over again. That's just my personal opinion. So moving on. So that was Warner Brothers. Let's move on to Paramount. So remember we talked about national cinemas a couple of chapters ago, and it might be helpful to think of each nation having their own sort of genre. It might be helpful to think of it in terms of the majors as well. They had their, if you went to go watch a Warner Brothers film, you pretty much knew what type of film you were watching. Right? So let's move on to Paramount. Started as a distribution firm, expanded to buy up a large number of theaters. They actually ended up declaring bankruptcy in 1933 because of the Depression, but underwent court-ordered reorganization. In 1936, Barney Balaban became president and made the company profitable again. Paramount was known for their European-style production, so think of it more like more prestigious production. Cecil B. DeMille made many films through Paramount. But they're also known for their Marx Brothers comedies. Has anyone heard of Marx Brothers by chance?
That sounds familiar.
So you might have never seen a Marx Brothers film, but their comedy is very influential in our current comedy, right? So if you haven't seen anyone do like the joke like, what's the secret word? Where they have like a cigar like that. Has anyone seen anyone do that? No? Anyone? Okay, anyone's So that's Marx Brothers, right? So I want to show a clip from a Marx Brothers film. Here it is. This is password scene.
Hey, Baraballi. What do you want? Watch the door for a few minutes, and don't let anyone in without the password.
All right, what is it?
Swordfish is the password, do you understand?
Okay, I got it.
Well, what is it?
Password.
Swordfish! Swordfish!
Right, the swordfish, the swordfish. Piazza Muscles in the room for a bunch of così pazzi. Who are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Who are you?
I'm fine too, but you can't come in unless you give the password.
Oh, what is the password?
Oh, no, you gotta tell me. Hey, I tell what I do, I give you 3 guesses. It's the name of a fish.
Is it Mary?
That's an old fish.
She isn't, but she drinks like one. Let me see. Is it sturgeon?
Hey, you crazy. Sturgeon, he's a doctor who cuts you open when you're sick. Now, I give you one more chance.
I got it.
Haddock. That's the funny. I got a haddock too. What do you take for a haddock? Well, now, sometimes I take aspirin, sometimes I take a calomel.
Say, I'd walk a mile for a calomel.
You mean chocolate calomel. I like that too, but you know, guess it. Hey, what's the money? You don't understand English? You can't come in here unless you say swordfish. Now, I'll give you one more guess.
Swordfish. Swordfish. I think I got it. Is it swordfish?
That's it. You guess it.
Pretty good, eh?
And fine. You guess it.
What do you want?
I want to come in.
What's the password?
No, you're all full of me. Yeah, swordfish.
No, I got tired of that. I changed it.
What's the password now?
Yeah, I forgot it. I better come out.
Comedy. Marx Brothers. All right, moving on here. So that was Paramount. Let's go to MGM. So MGM did well for a period, 1930 through 1945. MGM's films were more luxurious, sort of high. They had a high budget films. Gone with the Wind is probably their most prestigious film. They were known for having a lot of big stars under contract. So stars like Mickey Rooney and Clark Gable. Once again, high budget films and prestigious stars. I want to show another clip from Gone with the Wind.
But you can't, none of you care for me.
Oh, my dear, why must you make me see things look at you? How can I make you understand? You're so young and unthinking. You don't know what marriage means.
I know I love you and I want to be your wife. You don't love Melanie.
She's like me, Scarlett. She's part of my blood. We understand each other.
But you love me.
How could I help loving you? You who have all the passion for life that I lack. But that kind of love isn't enough to make a successful marriage for two people who are as different as we are.
Why don't you say it, you coward? You're afraid to marry me. You'd rather live with that silly little fool who can't open her mouth except say yes, no, and raise a glass of me, my old friend, just like you.
Who has to say things like that about me?
Who are you to tell me I mustn't? You led me on. You made me believe you wanted to marry me.
Now, Scarlett, be fair. I never at any time...
You did. It's true, you did. I hate you till I die. I can't think of anything bad enough to call you.
Sergeant.
Sir, you should have made your presence known.
In the middle of that beautiful love scene? That wouldn't have been very tactful, would it? But don't worry. Your secret is safe with me.
Sir, you are no devil.
And you, miss, are no lady.
Oh.
But don't think that I hold that against you. Ladies have never held any charm for me.
First you take a low, common advantage of me, then you insult me.
I meant it as a compliment. And I hope to see more of you when you're free of the spell of the elegant Mr. Wilkes. He doesn't strike me as half good enough for a girl of your, what was it? Your passion for living?
How dare you? You aren't fit to wipe his boot.
And you were going to hate him for the rest of your life.
There we go. Gone with the Wind. Moving along to 20th Century Fox. So Fox actually ended in depression and worship at other major studios. Sidney Kent formed the head of distribution for Paramount, took over and helped turn the film industry or the Fox around. Fox ended up merging with another small company called 20th Century. They became 20th Century Fox. Obviously no longer around through Disney, RIP. Few long-term stars. They did have one star, Shirley Temple. Is anyone familiar with Shirley Temple? Yeah, she's a little girl that sings songs, right? So this is a clip from one of Shirley Temple's films.
Oh, yeah.
Mother was here.
This is the Candyland Hour for all good children. The orchestra will play our theme song.
You know that song, don't you?
Sure I do.
Well, then sing it. Come on. Come on,
I thrown away my toys, even my drum and train. I want to make some noise with real life aeroplane. Someday I'm going to fly. I'll be a pilot too. And when I do, how would you like to be my crew? On the good ship, Lollipop, it's a sweet trip to a candy shop where bonbons play. On the sunny beach of Peppermint Bay, lemonade stands everywhere, Cracker Jack fans fill the air, and there you are, happy landing on a chocolate bar.
Alright, that was Shirley Temple. Does this creep anybody else out?
Kinda. It's weird to see a child like that.
Yeah, I don't know if we're just all cynical now, but yeah, that sort of creeps me out a little bit. I don't know why. Alright, moving along. So that was Shirley Temple. Moving on to RKO. It was the shortest lived of all the majors. Always lag behind other majors, unable to convince the studio to adopt this sound. Remember they had that conflict with Western Electric where they were trying to figure out which sound on, whether a sound on film or sound on disc, right? RKO lost out on that. It became profitable during the war, but it had problems afterward. They often lacked the bigger stars that the other major studios had. One of their stars, Katharine Hepburn, many films she was in for RKO. Unfortunately, Katharine Hepburn sort of garnered a reputation for overacting and bad acting, and then after that, her career kind of diminished very quickly. But this is from a film called Philadelphia Story, 1940. This is Katharine Hepburn.
I suppose you'd still be attracted to any man of spirit, though. There's something engaging about it, this goddess business. Something more challenging to the male than the more obvious charms.
Really?
Really. We're very vain, you know. This citadel can and shall be taken, and I'm the boy to do it.
You seem quite contemptuous of me all of a sudden.
No, Red. Not of you. Never of you. Red, you could be the finest woman on this earth. I'm contemptuous of something inside of you you either can't help or make no attempt to. Your so-called strength. Your prejudice against weakness. Your blank intolerance.
Is that all?
That's the gist of it. Because you'll never be a first-class human being or a first-class woman until you've learned to have some regard for human frailty. It's a pity your own foot can't slip a little sometime. But your sense of inner divinity wouldn't allow that. This goddess must and shall remain intact. There are more of you than people realize. A special class of the American female. The married maidens.
So help me, Dexter. If you say another word,
I'm through, Red. For the moment, I've had my say.
You can't marry that guy.
George, I'm going to. Why not?
Well, I don't know. I thought I'd be for it at first, but you just don't seem to match up.
Then the fool's with me.
Well, maybe so, but all the same, now you can't do it.
No.
No.
Come around about noon tomorrow. I mean today. Snob.
Say, what do you mean, snob?
You're...
All right, Catherine Hepburn. Also, RKO also released Citizen Kane. Famously, Citizen Kane was a huge flop, and actually sort of contributed to RKO's downfall. Once again, Citizen Kane is often considered to be one of the greatest films ever made, but unfortunately was a flop at the box office. RKO was also known for their animation studio, which was named Disney. Yeah. So RKO had a film animation studio called Disney, right? Obviously, was one of the ways that it stayed in business. All right, so that was the major five. Now let's get down to the little three. So first off is Universal Studios. So Universal, often known for like the B movies or the monster films. So you had Frankenstein, you had your Dracula and Invisible Man. I'm sure many of you remember recently how Universal was sort of trying to push that connected universe of monster films. Remember that? That big push that sort of just flopped horribly.
Oh yeah.
Primarily after The Mummy, right? The Mummy film. But they're trying to like revamp the monster film again. But during this time period, around the 1930s, they were known for the monster film. And this is a clip from Frankenstein.
Come in. Come in.
In that shadow.
Sit down. Sit down. You see it. It understands. Watch.
From Frankenstein. All right, so Columbia had a much lower budgets, but often turned out popular films. They'd often borrow stars and directors from other major studios. One of their films, they were known for the Western, but also for their series of Three Stooges films. So here's a clip from the Three Stooges.
square happy. These oil bonds belong to a Mr. B.O. Davis.
Comedy. All right, so moving on to the United Artists. So United Artists, the sound era saw the beginning of a slow decline for the United Artists. Charlie Chaplin released several films through this studio. Alfred Hitchcock also released several films, including Rebecca and Spellbound. So I did want to show a clip from Rebecca here, an Alfred Hitchcock film. We'll talk more about Alfred Hitchcock in a couple of lessons from now. From Rebecca. All right, so, and then of course there was a few independent film studios, offered little competition to the majors and the minors. Each group had a different function within the industry. The majors provided a bulk of A pictures. There was a couple of studios, Monograph and Republic, made B pictures, including westerns, criminal thrillers, serials, that sort of thing. But what I want to do is I want to play a little game here. The first person who can guess the film studio that this intro belongs to wins my respect. All right, moving on here. Who can name it first? I thought you said one.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's helpful to remember some of this stuff if you associate with things that you know, like MGM. I'm sure many of you have seen this.
Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers is correct. Was it? Paramount.
I have not seen this version of Paramount.
Yeah, that's an older one. That is an older one.
Universal.
Yep. Yeah, several of these have been updated recently.
Disney.
Disney is correct. Now Disney owns everything.
Yeah, I think they own like 30% of the entertainment industry alone.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I don't know how they're not considered a monopoly.
Well, things are different with how things are regulated nowadays. I can't remember if there's one more or not. I think this is one that wasn't around. Yep, okay, there we go, Pixar. It's not one of the majors, so don't put that on your exam. Here's some RKO stuff. You might recognize it if you're a fan of watching old Disney cartoons or Disney animated cartoons. Snow White. So let's talk about some innovations during this time period. So sound recording became way more sophisticated. You had lighter booms, which you could put a microphone on the boom and get closer to the action. There was multiple track recording permitted, so you could have music, voices, and sound effects. You could mix them together on different tracks. Songs were recorded, and actors would often mouth out scenes, and they would put them together later on, like they'd mix them together later. This is where you're starting to see the use of symphonic scores. Does anyone know what a symphonic score is? Yeah, so it's a music that's associated with the film, right? So it's playing along with the film. It's designed particularly for what's going on in that particular scene. So I want to show you an example. This is from King Kong, 1933. So realistic. All right. So the symphonic score was all that, the orchestra that's going on with the action of the scene, right? All right, so let's talk about the Bell and Howell. I believe this is pronounced rotambulator. Right, so this was a large dolly crane thing, so a 700-pound crane. It could go up to 7 feet tall. It was often used in high-rise shots. One of the more iconic scenes was filmed in Gone with the Wind. This is the famous crane shot in Gone with the Wind. Oh, the poor Confederacy. All right, so obviously this is an impressive shot, not just for the technology itself, but just the scope and the scale, right? Having all those actors in this scene. Moving on to color filmmaking. So early in the 1930s, Technicolor was introduced. This was often very expensive, so not every film. So there were some, even though you could capture color through Technicolor, not every film would use color because it was relatively expensive to use early on. But this is the iconic scene from Wizard of Oz. This is when Dorothy enters. Here it is. as you can see here, color is sort of being used as like this fantasy element, this otherworldly element. All right, moving along here. You're also seeing the use of more sophisticated special effects. All right, so one of those is rear projection. Can anyone tell me what rear projection is? Very popular during this time period.
Actors performing in a studio set as an image from earlier and projected onto screen.
Right, so exactly. So you have a screen that's an image is being projected onto that screen from behind, and the actor or actress gets in front of the screen, and it makes it look like they're in that location, right? So here is a video on rear projection.
Here because it's rarely given much attention these days. Unlike some other flashier filmmaking techniques, rear projection is designed to be invisible, used in the pursuit of naturalism, even though the technique itself is highly unnatural. The process combines sets and actors in the foreground with background action that was filmed separately at a different time and location. The foreground action is filmed in front of a screen, and the previously recorded background imagery is projected in reverse onto that screen. The whole thing is then shot together to produce the final image. This creates the illusion that characters are in a place they are not in. When rear projection was first used in the 1930s, it allowed filmmakers to circumvent the technological limitations of cameras and sound recording at that time. In other words, it made shots that had previously been impossible, possible. The long-standing question of how do you show someone driving and talking in a car had finally been answered. Movies used the process constantly for driving scenes because it made it so easy to record dialogue while outside or moving in a car, especially film noirs. By the 40s and 50s, rear screen projection had proved to be so effective and efficient that it became standard practice in the Hollywood studio machine. Alfred Hitchcock used rear projection to expand the world in his films and visualize elaborate sets or grand locations that would have been impossible without the technique. Today, the technique is seen as old-fashioned and anachronistic because it's no longer technically necessary or even that convenient. While it was once a convincing imitation of reality, rear projection is no longer considered the best technique for achieving naturalism. Viewers have gotten better at spotting anything artificial, so the effect now appears visually jarring because the foreground and background tend to look starkly separate, creating spatial discontinuity. When it's used in films today, it's largely an artistic decision made by the director wishing to achieve a postmodern effect rather than just to cut costs.
All right, that's rear projection. What's next here? The next is optical printing. So optical printing, it might be helpful to think of this as sort of an analog version of special effects. And there's a quick video I want to show that explains it pretty well. This is optical printing.
This is an optical printer. An optical printer may look like something out of a 1970s sci-fi drama, but it's actually the foundational technology for creating visual effects and motion graphics, like the stuff you see on the big screen today. The first optical printer was developed in 1929 by Linwood G. Dunn, who combined a projector and motion picture camera that worked as a way to rephotograph film. Here's how it works. The camera and printer head are rail mounted for precision control. These parts can be moved horizontally, vertically, and laterally, and allow for tilting, zooming, and panning. Let's take a look at some other things optical printers can do, starting with frame-based transformations, like holding, for example. Then there's superimposition, dissolves, fades, and flips. Now for some time-based transformations. Here's a looping effect, some speed ramping, and slow-mo. Let's try something a bit more complex now, like resequencing. Here are some examples of image-based transformation, the pan and zoom. Now to put it all together with some compositing.
So obviously a lot of this can be done digitally through digital software, but optical printing was before that. All right, so this is a scene from Citizen Kane. This is a pretty iconic scene that incorporates a lot of special effects. Many times is often shown as evidence of why Citizen Kane is such a masterpiece, but this is from Citizen Kane. Often this is used, optical printing is often used to show like the passage of time. All right, before we go, Phil, we're gonna finish up on Tuesday with the rest of the Hollywood studio system. Before we go, I do wanna make an announcement about office hours. So I think the best way to handle office hours, if you do wanna have a conversation with me, more than happy to do it. Tuesdays and Thursdays is when I'm primarily available to do office hours if you wanted to talk about anything. The best way to do it, and this is, for you guys and then for everybody at home, once again, like and subscribe. The best way to do it is just send me an email that day and say, can we have a conversation and can we talk? And then I'll send you a Zoom link, and then then we can meet that way, right? And we can kind of determine what's the best time to talk. But once again, that's open to everybody if you want to speak with me during my office hours, right? That is it. I will see you on Tuesday where we will continue this chapter on the Hollywood studio